made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not only or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
What are the ways forward? Like, for example, I wanted to ask you, what would be the few books that you would recommend of Nehru's books? Also, how did you get to know Nehru? And how can we all get to know Nehru? How was your journey, your personal journey of knowing Nehru, and some of the books that you would recommend?
Nehru's own books are so accessible that first of all, I would recommend that, they are so easy to read,
Okay.
and they are beautifully written. And so I would suggest that anybody wanting to get to know anything about Nehru, first and foremost, you read Discovery of India. Because Discovery of India is the entire Indian history, right up till the 1940s, including Quit India movement.
Okay.
Only thing it doesn't have is 45-47 period of transfer of power, because it was written in 44. So till that period, it's a complete record of Indian history, and it gives you Nehru's views in great detail. There's some personal, it talks about his own life also in it. And but it is a fantastic way of getting to know what he thought, what were his views on various things, and also learning about your own culture and history. I don't think there is a better introduction to Indian culture, including ancient Indian culture, Hindu culture, than Discovery of India. I challenge anyone to give me a better and more accessible work.
Wonderful.
Secondly, I would say for Indian history, the autobiography also very good, because that gives you a more detailed account of the struggle for freedom, particularly from 1918-19 till 1934. That period, the Gandhi period, when Gandhi first came, it is in much more detail, because that is the period he covers in his autobiography. And of course, Glimpses of World History is again a fantastic introduction to world history. So his three basic works, I think, still remain classics.
Three basic works, right?
Try to read, but Discovery certainly is, I would say, the first book that you should read. But if you want to go into a little more depth, then I think autobiography is also so interesting, because it also gives you a flavor of India's struggle for freedom. In that book, he's constantly arguing with Gandhiji. All the time, he's criticizing him. He's saying, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, It shows what kind of freedom struggle we had. People who were the closest comrades, they could disagree with each other so strongly. And yet work together. That was democracy. Their commitment to democracy was so strong, even within themselves, inner party democracy. You see how that it is that inner party democracy which later becomes, at the level of the Indian nation and state after independence. It is that practice within the Congress which becomes then generalized. It is because they had grown up in that. They had never tried to suppress each other's voices,
Diversity,
but argued ferociously, with each other, and yet worked together. So consensus building, which I talked about, was not some that Nehru had, suddenly thought that this is how you run a country. It was that 30 years experience of working in the Indian struggle for freedom, in the Indian National Congress, where the way they resolved that went forward was through discussion, debate,
dialogues,
consensus building, difference, again, working together. It was a constant process. So he had practice of that. And he had colleagues who were stalwarts. who were no less than him. So he was used to, being an equal with others, not used to being big boss. Rajaji, I mean,
Right.
C. Rajagopalachari, what a giant of an intellectual. Maulana Azad, such a giant of an intellectual. When Nehru says in his discovery of India in his introduction, he writes it in jail, He was in Ahmednagar fort for Quit India movement. 3 years he was in jail. And he wrote this book in 5 months.
5 months.
In jail. With only access to whatever books and all, had managed to get from outside. That's all. Wrote it longhand, and
there must be the manuscript somewhere.
Yeah, it's in the Nehru Memorial Museum.
It's in the library. Okay.
It's beautiful. You should see it. He hardly crosses out anything.
Wow.
Beautiful handwriting. It's a fantastic thing to just see that manuscript, And he says in the introduction, I'm so lucky that during my jail term, I have had the pleasure of interacting, because they were all there. Gandhiji was separate, but many working committee members, they were all there together. Maulana Azad, he shared a cell with Maulana Azad. Huh? They shared a room in the jail.
Okay. Wow.
As he said, they could hear each other snore. Gobind Ballabh Pant, he says, was a very erudite companion. Then he mentions Asaf Ali.
Right.
Amazing. The Acharya Narendra Dev was also there in the jail.
Yeah.
So he mentioned these 4 or 5.
And he mentioned them all in the book.
Introduction. As people from whom he benefited.
He has learned. Yeah.
Yeah. And about Maulana Azad, he says that his intellect and his knowledge was so impressive and even intimidating, he says. And of the classics and everything. So, it was a different world. When we talk in these terms and all that, you just feel you are completely out of it. You have no idea about what you're talking about,
Yeah. And that's why it kind of, personally, it also sort of, pains me that 75 years after the independence, we are still trying to understand this person. Whereas to my mind, he should have already been established and already been that luminary in the sky. That we knew. But it seems that we have ourselves not valued enough, not understood him enough. I don't know where we have gone wrong.
It also changes from generation to generation. I would say that earlier generations after independence, Nehru's books, for example, Discovery of India, Autobiography, Glimpses, these would be in educated households. They would be necessary.
They would be, right.
And children would grow up reading them.
But I guess things change from 90s on. I am an 80s kid. I am an 80s child. But if you ask me about the last 20 years, I think that, I don't know, somewhere we kind of lost him. And also, that's why I also wanted to ask one more thing is that, these leaders like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, they are much bigger than just political leaders. They are also people whose books we read, people whose quotes we follow, who become part of the pop culture. They become part of that entire, a gamut of knowledge. Where does Nehru stand in that? Is Nehru also studied by international academics? Is Nehru's work studied academically?
Yes. Well, not. Of course, Gandhi's thought is much.
Yeah.
I would say that because but you know what? You would be surprised how much Nehru is known in Africa and West Asia. I remember once Simon Peres had come to JNU.
Okay.
I'm talking of about 20 years ago. And we were, he gave a little talk and we were discussing and all that. And he said, we grew up on Nehru. He was our hero.
Wow. That's
For
amazing.
a whole generation, he was the hero of the non-Western world. I mean, despite what happened with China and all that, we were very pleasantly surprised on a visit to China about 10 years ago that the scholars over there, they had a very different view of Nehru. They
Chinese
didn't have
scholars.
the official view of Nehru at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Some of them were the older scholars, they were great admirers of Nehru.
Right.
He had such love for China, such admiration for China.
Nehru.
Historically, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And he really had hoped that, after the end of colonialism, because these were the two big countries of Asia, that it would be a joint kind of effort.
Joint power, yeah.
To take Asia out of the underdevelopment, the poverty, the backwardness. He saw how much he supported China in the UN, for example.
I think we should have another conversation on China and Nehru and the war and everything that happened around that. Of course, this would be too long a conversation if we delve into that. But ma'am, I have one last question. The role of Nehru Memorial Library in what is the role of in knowing Nehru, in carrying forward his legacy, the kind of activities that has been happening? Can you just briefly tell us about the Nehru Memorial?
The Nehru Memorial Museum and Library was set up in memory of Jawaharlal Nehru to take forward his ideals. Therefore, the library was set up as a library of modern Indian history with a special focus on the history of the freedom struggle. Okay, so that was how it was envisaged. It has grown into now a very good social science library. It has lots of works on all social sciences, not only on history, but the original objective was to focus on modern Indian history and freedom struggle. Therefore, it has very large sections on Gandhi, Nehru, there's a whole Gandhiana, Nehruana, I mean, the books everywhere. Then also it was meant to be the focus being on freedom struggle again. An archive, a non-official archive. That, for example, National Archives is there, but archives is supposed to have government records. As and when government records become open, they are supposed to shift to the National Archive. Right. Of course, National Archives also acquires some other private papers, collections, like they have the Rajendra Prasad papers, which is a huge collection. Then there was this huge project on history of freedom movement by Tarachand after independence.
Okay.
Official history. So huge collection of material which was there for that project. That is in National Archives. But basically, National Archives is meant for the government repository. The idea here was to collect the private papers and of individuals as well as papers of institutions, parties. So the Congress archives is in the Nehru Memorial.
Okay.
The AICC papers, they are called. So that entire historical record of the Congress party is held by the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in its archival section, because it is meant to be a record to study the freedom struggle. So All India Statespeople Conference, their papers are there. Hindu Mahasabha papers are there. Okay. So lots of party papers are there. And also huge number of papers of individuals.
Okay.
Both, but then since it was set up after independence, it also acquired papers of people who were important in the period of Nehru's prime ministership also, post-independence. because you could not confine it to just before independence.
Hmm.
It collected a large number. It also had an oral history section where it has a very valuable archive of, because it started, in the 60s.
Hmm.
So a lot of people were alive then
Hmm.
who were contemporaries of Nehru and participants in the freedom
So
struggle.
audio visuals are also there, or
Those are basically audio,
okay,
because at that time
visuals were
recording
not there.
audio. Later, some audio-visual recordings were done during my time.
But testimonies, oral testimonies, and those kind of things.
Recordings, and those are then transcribed. Those
Okay,
are
right.
And of course, the other thing is it has a huge collection of newspapers
Okay.
of the pre-independence period.
Pre-independence.
They have some newspapers even going back to middle of 19th century. And certainly all the major newspapers that you need to write about the freedom struggle and the colonial period. So some newspapers are not there, but it has a very large number of newspaper collection.
So,
okay.
right.
So these are the basic, apart from the museum. Museum is of course there. I'm not talking about that. Everybody knows that museum part. But that was, no, see, museum also, let me point out, only 2 or 3 rooms are rooms kept as they were when Nehru was living.
Okay.
His bedroom, his sitting room, and his office. Office also recreated from what it was in the External Affairs Ministry and all that, Prime Minister's office. The rest of the building is actually an exhibition on the struggle for freedom.
Okay.
With only a small part being the story of Nehru in the struggle for freedom.
So it is not just about Nehru at all.
Nehru comes in with there's some photographs and all of the childhood and this and that, and then they join into the bigger story.
Right.
So the basic thing which is spread over, maybe 20 rooms is all the story of the struggle for freedom.
Right.
Through photographs, texts, images, and all that.
So in today's, if I understand it correctly, in today's age of post-truth, if the young generation who are reading only WhatsApp, if they have any doubt whether Nehru ever visited Bhagat Singh in the jail or not, they can go to the library and they can find out the newspapers and they can read. They can find out the truth on their own. I mean, all of these knowledge and all of these history of our freedom struggle is there in the library, and they can find out. I mean, that is important too.
Yes, and one of the things which was started during the period when I was there was a whole digitization initiative.
Okay.
So a lot of the material which I'm talking about is also now available in digitized form. Not all of it.
Online. Are they also available online?
So people can access it online.
Can access online. Right. Right. So that's amazing. Fantastic, ma'am. Thank you so much for speaking.